Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back. You're standing now in the middle of an ancient wonder, the bustling heart of a Mesopotamian city, somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Dust swirls at your feet as merchants shout in languages lost to time. Donkeys bray impatiently, and pottery clinks softly in the hands of eager traders. The sun beats down on baked mud brick buildings, while the air smells like roasted grain animal hides. And let's be honest, at least a little bit of sewage. You probably won't survive this without a strong stomach. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my sleepy travelers tune in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stroll slowly down a narrow, uneven street where tradespeople are already at work. The year somewhere around 2500 BCE, give or take a few centuries. Exact dates are fuzzy when you're this deep into the past. The city might be Ur or Lagash or Uruk, one of those great hubs that historians still argue was the first true city in human history. Towering ziggurats rise in the distance like stairways to heaven. And here, you're surrounded by some of humanity's earliest innovators, Mesopotamian artisans. This isn't the realm of kings and priests. This is where the real magic happens, where ordinary people build shape and invent the tools that fuel an entire civilization. You glance to your left and see a potter's stall, where fresh clay vessels dry in the sun, their soft forms hardening with each passing hour. Further down, metalworkers pound copper sheets under primitive hammers, their rhythmic strikes forming a strange metallic heartbeat for the city. You might think of ancient people as primitive, but honestly, they're pulling off feats that would make modern engineers pause. Without the benefit of steel electricity or computer-aided design, they've somehow unlocked an astonishing range of technologies. And much of it started right here. You pass a merchant selling baskets filled with barley and dates two staples that sustained the Mesopotamian diet for generations. Behind him, scribes scratch tiny wedge-shaped cuneiform symbols onto clay tablets. That's right, you're also standing in the land that invented writing itself. Historians still argue whether writing began as a religious tool or an accounting trick to track trade and taxes. But either way, it revolutionized human communication. But tonight, we're not here for kings, gods, or empires. We're here for the inventors, the tinkerers, who solved problems, experimented with materials, and stumbled upon creations that would echo across millennia. Many of these inventions have been lost or overshadowed, buried under layers of later civilizations. Yet if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint tapping of hammers, or the low hum of looms, and the hiss of kilns hard at work. The street widens into a noisy marketplace, where artisans proudly display their crafts, intricately carved cylinder seals, used for signatures, glass beads, shimmering like tiny suns, and woven textiles dyed in rich blues, purples, and reds. You reach out to touch a garment, smooth linen interwoven with fine wool, its texture surprisingly modern beneath your fingertips. Further ahead, you spot a craftsman skillfully shaping copper wire into a delicate pendant. Jewelry wasn't just decoration here. It signified status, wealth, and sometimes even held spiritual meaning. Tiny lapis lazuli beads glint in the sunlight, imported all the way from distant Afghanistan. A reminder that even back then, global trade routes hummed with life. The smells change as you wander. Charcoal smoke billows from a nearby kiln where pottery is being fired, one of the earliest industrial technologies, right before your eyes. The potter's wheel spins effortlessly as a steady hand coaxes the clay into elegant forms. And you can't help but marvel at the simplicity and genius of it. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian artisans invented these technologies entirely on their own, or borrowed ideas from earlier smaller cultures that left fewer records behind. But what's undeniable is that these artisans refined, improved, and systematized these crafts into industries that laid the groundwork for every civilization that followed. A sudden gust of wind kicks up dust, and you instinctively shield your eyes. As it settles, you catch sight of workers applying thick black tar to the hull of a reed boat. That's bitumen, one of Mesopotamia's strangest and most versatile materials. We'll get to that weird, sticky miracle soon enough. You continue forward past rows of clay jars, filled with oils and perfumes, past builders stacking sun-dried bricks, past children playing a game with small carved stones that suspiciously resembles a prehistoric version of marbles. And all around you, woven into every object, is the handiwork of artisans who solved problems you never even considered problems, like how to keep your home waterproof, how to store grain for years, how to cast molten metal into intricate forms, and yes, even how to lock your front door. You've just barely scratched the surface of their lost inventions. But don't worry, we're about to dive much, much deeper. And next up, you'll witness the simple yet revolutionary tool that quite literally shaped the entire ancient world, the potter's wheel. You step closer to the potter's workshop, drawn by the hypnotic rhythm of spinning clay. The sun glints off a simple device that, if you think about it, completely changed the course of human craftsmanship, the potter's wheel. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. Just a flat circular platform mounted horizontally on a sturdy base. The artisan sits cross-legged, one hand steadying the mound of wet clay, while the other guides its shape. His bare foot rhythmically kicks a weighted flywheel below, keeping the upper platform spinning at just the right speed. The result, perfect symmetry every time. Before the invention of the wheel, potters shaped their vessels by coiling clay ropes and smoothing them by hand, a slow, painstaking process. But with the wheel, suddenly pots could be formed faster, taller, and far more consistently. You watch as the vessel takes shape before your eyes, a water jar with smooth, even sides, rising like magic from a spinning lump of mud. Honestly, it's a little mesmerizing. Historians still argue exactly when and where the potter's wheel first appeared. Some suggest early versions popped up as far back as 3500 BCE, perhaps even earlier right here in Mesopotamia. Others propose that the idea might have migrated from neighboring regions where early experiments with rotating platforms were underway. What's certain is that once Mesopotamian artisans got hold of it, they refined the wheel into a tool of pure genius. You glance at the rows of finished vessels drying nearby jars, bowls, amphorae, and storage containers of every size and shape. The wheel allowed artisans to not only standardize sizes, but also develop entirely new vessel forms suited for trade storage and ritual use. And in a world where every household relied on pots for everything, water, grain, oil, wine, this invention rippled through every layer of daily life. But the impact wasn't limited to pottery. The potter's wheel may have inspired larger technological leaps as well. Think about it. Once humans figured out how to control rotational motion for one purpose, the seed was planted for other circular wonders: grinding stones, irrigation devices, even the wheels on carts and chariots that would later roll across Mesopotamian roads. The wheel, in all its forms, may trace its roots right back to this humble potter's workshop. You notice the artisan occasionally dipping his fingers into a small bowl of water, keeping the clay slick and workable. His movements are confident, precise, almost meditative. It's easy to forget that for him this isn't innovation, it's routine. Just another day in the workshop. For you, it's a front row seat to one of humanity's greatest breakthroughs. The workshop itself tells another story. Tools made of bone wood and simple copper lay neatly arranged nearby, cutting wires for slicing finished pots, wooden paddles for shaping, cords for decorating. Early kilns stand ready in the background, their mouths blackened from repeated firings. This entire operation hums with quiet, practiced efficiency technology in its purest, most elegant form. You glance down at the raw clay, waiting to be shaped. It was dug from the banks of the nearby Euphrates, mixed carefully with water, and sometimes a bit of sand or straw to control shrinkage during drying and firing. Even at this level, the artisan is thinking like a scientist, balancing ratios, testing mixtures, refining formulas that will hold up to intense heat. Historians still argue how much of this knowledge was formalized science versus hard-won trial and error passed down through generations. Likely, it was a bit of both. You can practically hear ancient masters instructing their apprentices, more sand in summer, less in winter. Watch for cracks as it dries. Feel the weight. If it's too light, it will break. And yet, for all its brilliance, the potter's wheel was only one piece of the puzzle. The real alchemy happened next, when these spinning creations faced the roaring fire of Mesopotamian kilns, a subject we're about to explore. You take one last look at the spinning wheel still humming its quiet, steady song, and realize you've just witnessed a moment where human ingenuity met simple physics, and the result was civilization itself. Ahead, you smell the sharp, earthy tang of burning wood and clay baking. The kilns await. The scent of burning wood grows stronger as you approach the heart of the workshop district, the kilns. You feel the heat radiating before you even see the flames. This is where raw earth transforms into something permanent, where simple clay becomes storage jars, cooking pots, and even works of art that may outlast empires. You pause before a dome-shaped kiln, its mud brick surface glowing faintly under the harsh Mesopotamian sun. The firing chamber inside crackles with life-devouring bundles of dried reeds and timber with greedy snaps and hisses. The potter's wheel may have shaped the vessels, but the kiln gives them their strength, their permanence, and sometimes their brilliance. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians developed the enclosed updraft kiln independently or adapted it from earlier, simpler pit firing techniques. But what's clear is that by around 3000 BCE, they had mastered the art of controlled high-temperature firing. These kilns reached temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, no small feat without modern thermometers or electric blowers. You step closer, careful of the waves of heat shimmering in the air. The potter's apprentice, sweat dripping down his face, carefully adjusts clay plugs and ventilation holes to regulate airflow and temperature. His job is part science, part instinct, too little air, and the fire dies. Too much, and the pottery cracks or warps. This delicate dance determines whether days of labor are preserved or shattered. Nearby finished vessels cool on racks, their surfaces harden to a satisfying ring when tapped. Some are simple and utilitarian, sturdy jars for storing oil, grain, or water. Others are beautifully decorated with painted geometric patterns, intricate incisions, or applied motifs of animals and gods. You can almost hear the ancient merchants negotiating over them in the crowded market you left behind. Not far from the main kiln, you spot a smaller experimental furnace, this one used for creating glazed surfaces. Yes, even glazing had early origins here. By adding minerals like copper or lead to the clay surface, artisans discovered that they could create glossy colored finishes when fired at just the right temperature. The first shimmering glazes of Mesopotamia laid the foundation for the glasswork that would soon follow. You run your fingers along a glazed fragment, the faint turquoise color still vibrant after thousands of years. It's almost comical to realize that while you struggle to keep modern ceramic mugs from chipping in your kitchen, these ancient artisans made ware that has survived not only daily use, but also millennia underground. The heat shifts suddenly as another worker opens a side vent, releasing a brief burst of hot air and fine smoke that smells of charred wood and minerals. You step back, wiping your eyes, and spot a curious pile of broken shards nearby the rejects. Even the most skilled artisans couldn't control every variable. Temperature fluctuations, trapped air bubbles, or imperfect clay mixtures doomed many vessels to sudden catastrophic failure inside the kiln. Historians still argue how standardized these early firing methods truly were. Some believe each workshop guarded its own secret recipes and firing techniques like closely held trade secrets. Others suggest knowledge was widely shared across guilds and city-states, leading to surprisingly consistent results for mass-produced pottery. Beyond the main kiln yard, you catch sight of another structure, a proto-factory of sorts. Rows of identical storage jars sit ready for transport, destined for temple warehouses, merchant caravans, or local households. These weren't just decorative items, they were crucial to Mesopotamian economic life, used to store surpluses, pay taxes, and support complex trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. Even more fascinating, some of these vessels were marked before firing with early stamps and seals, a kind of prehistoric trademark or quality assurance system. One glance at the symbol pressed into the clay told a buyer who made it where it came from, and sometimes even what it contained. You stand there for a moment, watching this dance of fire clay and craftsmanship, realizing just how sophisticated this ancient society truly was. They weren't merely surviving. They were innovating, experimenting, and laying the technological foundations for so much of what followed. And as impressive as their pottery and kilns are, you've only scratched the surface of their creative genius. The next stall over hums with another kind of magic, the shimmering, fragile world of glassmaking. The moment you lay eyes on those glittering beads, you realize you're about to witness an entirely different kind of alchemy. You leave the blazing heat of the kilns behind and step into a quieter, more delicate corner of the artisan quarter. Here, the scent of burning wood gives way to something sharper, a faint chemical tang like scorched sand. The flickering glow of small dome-shaped furnaces draws you in. This is where Mesopotamian artisans flirted with alchemy, the birth of glassmaking. At first glance, the products are deceptively simple. Tiny beads, shimmering discs, and small vessels that catch the light and throw it back in sparkling flashes of blue, green, and amber. But what you're looking at is nothing short of revolutionary. You crouch beside a young glassworker as he stirs a crucible filled with molten, glowing liquid, the first man-made glass. Historians still argue exactly how glassmaking first began here. Was it an accidental byproduct of ceramic glaze experiments? Or did artisans stumble upon the process while melting sand and plant ash in the intense heat of their kilns? Regardless, by around 2500 BCE, Mesopotamian glassmakers had moved beyond simple accidents and begun experimenting with intentional recipes. You watch as the worker adds natron, a naturally occurring form of soda ash, to purified sand, lowering the melting point to something their furnaces can handle. The heat reaches nearly 800 degrees Celsius, turning the mixture into a thick, glowing syrup. Then, with incredible care, he dips a metal rod into the molten glass, pulling it out slowly as a viscous strand cools into shape. Blowing glass, that familiar image of artisans puffing into long tubes, won't emerge for another 1,000 years. Right now, everything is shaped by winding molding and cutting. The beads you see were likely formed by winding molten threads around iron rods, then slicing them into tiny uniform pieces. Each bead is like a frozen droplet of light. The artisans use primitive but effective tools, simple bronze blades for cutting, wooden paddles for flattening, and stone molds for shaping basic forms. You admire their steady hands as they rotate rods and manipulate molten blobs into delicate amulets, tiny vessels, and decorative inlays destined for temples, palaces, or burial chambers. Even in this early stage, glass was expensive, far too precious for commoners. Royal tombs and temples boasted inlays of blue glass designed to imitate lapis lazuli, a gem imported at great cost from distant lands. Glass was also used to create fake gemstones, offering the elite glittering luxury without the price tag. You could call it the original knockoff market. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian glassmakers truly understood the full chemistry behind their craft, or simply relied on closely guarded recipes passed down through generations of trial and error. The evidence suggests a bit of both practical genius mixed with inherited secrets. You lean in closer to admire a tiny glass eye inlay designed for a statue, perhaps. The level of detail is astonishing. It's no wonder these artisans were highly respected, their skills carefully protected within family guilds or temple workshops. Their products traveled far, traded along caravan routes that stretched into Egypt, Anatolia, and the Indus Valley. But glass wasn't just about beauty. Small glass containers began appearing as vessels for perfumes and oil's luxury items, requiring equally precious containers. Some of these tiny jars survive even today, their surfaces weathered but still intact after thousands of years buried beneath Mesopotamian ruins. As you watch the glassworker set another tiny bead aside to cool, you realize how daring this work truly was. One slip, one uncontrolled flame, and the entire batch could shatter or burn. Yet through patience and practice, they mastered the temperamental nature of fire, sand, and chemistry, and in doing so created objects that modern museums still marvel over. You stand and glance back toward the larger kiln yard where the potters continue their own fiery dance. The entire artisan quarter hums with creative energy. Each workshop contributes its own specialized brilliance to the broader tapestry of Mesopotamian innovation. And while glass offered glittering beauty, another workshop just across the plaza offers something even more astonishing: metal transformed by fire into tools, weapons, and intricate works of art. You hear the unmistakable clang of hammers striking bronze and feel the pulse of a different kind of furnace drawing you forward. Next, you'll step into the smoky, intense world of metal casting, where lost wax techniques and molten rivers of copper birthed some of the ancient world's finest craftsmanship. The air thickens as you approach the metalworkers' district. Smoke curls lazily from dozens of small forges, and the rhythmic clang of hammer-striking metal rings out like a chorus of tiny thunderclaps. Here, artisans command fire with terrifying precision, transforming raw ore into shimmering tools, weapons, and jewelry that gleam even under the dusty Mesopotamian sky. You step carefully around piles of copper ingots stacked beside heaps of charcoal. The workers barely glance at you as they bend over their fire's eyes, narrowed against the flying sparks. This is dangerous work. One wrong move, and molten metal could spatter like liquid lightning. And yet the atmosphere feels oddly calm, almost meditative, like watching a team of chefs prepare a dish that just happens to involve fire, hotter than most volcanic lava. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian metalworkers discovered smelting independently or adapted it from earlier cultures further north. But by 3000 BCE, they were absolute masters of the craft. They knew precisely how to combine copper with tin to create bronze, harder, sharper, and far more durable than pure copper. This wasn't just metallurgy, it was early chemistry at work. You watch as one artisan ladles a glowing orange stream of liquid bronze into a carefully prepared mold. The mold itself is made of tightly packed clay, but it hides a secret. This is lost wax casting, one of the most advanced techniques of the ancient world. Here's how it works. The artisan first carves the desired shape in wax, say a small statue or intricate ornament. Then he coats the wax model with layers of fine clay, building up a shell that hardens into a mold. The entire assembly is fired, melting the wax and leaving behind a perfect cavity. Into this void, molten bronze is poured. Once cooled and broken open, the mold reveals an exact metal replica of the original wax form. You examine one such finished piece, a delicate figurine of a worshiper, hands clasped in prayer. The level of detail is astonishing. Tiny folds in the clothing, individual strands of hair. Even the faint expression of devotion captured forever in metal. The artisan polishes it carefully with a cloth, its surface gleaming like fresh sunlight. This lost wax technique allowed Mesopotamian artisans to create objects that were not only functional, but breathtakingly beautiful. From elaborate jewelry to ceremonial vessels and temple offerings, their work set a standard that would travel across continents and endure for millennia. Nearby, larger casting pits are used to create tools and weapons, axe heads, chisels, daggers, and spear points. These aren't luxury goods. They're the backbone of Mesopotamian society. Farmers rely on bronze plows to work the fields, builders on bronze saws to shape timber, and soldiers on bronze blades to protect the city walls. Historians still argue whether the spread of bronze tools triggered larger shifts in Mesopotamian social structures, allowing for larger cities, more specialization of labor, and increased warfare. One thing's certain, bronze didn't just reshape metal, it reshaped civilization. You glance at a pile of finished tools, marveling at their weight and balance. There's no wasted material, no crude guesswork. Each piece is functional art optimized through generations of experimentation. In one corner of the workshop, another metalworker works with wire-thin strips of hammered bronze, twisting and coiling them into elaborate jewelry. Tiny glass beads and lapis lazuli stones are threaded alongside, forming necklaces and earrings that could easily sit behind modern jewelry cases today without raising an eyebrow. It strikes you just how interconnected these artisan crafts really are. The metal workers rely on the potters for their molds, the glassmakers for their beads, and the lapidaries for their stones. This isn't a collection of isolated trades. It's an intricate web of shared knowledge and mutual dependence. The roar of the forge crackles again as fresh copper is poured into yet another mold. The workers remain steady, their movements practiced and sure. Fire is not their enemy. It's their tool tamed by discipline and skill. As you step back from the heat, you spot one final product cooling on a workbench, a bronze mirror, its polished surface reflecting your face back at you. For a brief moment, you see yourself blending into the hum of this ancient world, a visitor from the future, watching some of humanity's first true alchemists at work. But metal wasn't the only material artisans mastered. Just beyond the forge lies another workshop where a very different kind of transformation unfolds. One that starts not with fire, but with hides blades and endless patience. You're about to step into the world of leatherwork, where Mesopotamian artisans turned animal skins into armor clothing and objects that carried as much science as they did style. The roar of the forges fades as you slip into a cooler, dimmer part of the artisan quarter. Here, the air carries a different kind of sharpness, not the biting tang of molten metal or scorched sand, but the unmistakable musk of curing hides. You've entered the domain of the tanners and leatherworkers, where animal skins are transformed into some of Mesopotamia's most versatile and essential materials. You wrinkle your nose slightly. Let's not sugarcoat it, this place smells like hard work. Raw animal hides hang from wooden racks, some still fresh, others stiffening as they dry. Troughs filled with mysterious bubbling liquids gurgle ominously nearby. Yes, you're looking at some of the earliest examples of chemical processing, and you probably wouldn't survive the job interview to work here. Historians still argue how advanced Mesopotamian tanning techniques really were, but evidence suggests they knew quite a bit about softening and preserving hides. The tanners soak raw skins in water mixed with lime or wood ash to loosen hair and fat. Then comes the unappealing part, scraping the hides clean with bronze or stone blades, stretching them tightly across wooden frames to dry under the punishing Mesopotamian sun. You watch as one worker scrapes methodically, his blade gliding over the taut hide. Another dips a finished skin into a bath of crushed tree bark and fermented plant matter, early forms of tannins that further preserve and soften the material. The process is long, smelly, and unforgiving. But when it's done, the result is strong, flexible leather that can last for years. Nearby artisans slice sheets of leather into long strips, expertly braiding them into cords, belts, and intricate knots. Others cut and stitch large sections into sandals bags and water skins. And in a separate stall, you see one of the more serious applications: armor. Unlike metal armor, which was heavy and expensive, leather provided a lightweight form of protection that could be padded, layered, and treated for extra durability. Soldiers in Mesopotamian armies wore leather helmets and tunics reinforced with bronze scales, combining flexibility with defense. You run your fingers along a nearly finished cuirass, its overlapping plates stitched tightly to a leather backing surprisingly sophisticated for an army thousands of years ago. Historians still argue whether leather armor was a stopgap or a deliberate choice for lighter, faster infantry. Some scholars point out that not every city-state could afford the massive metal resources required for full bronze armor. Leather offered a more accessible alternative while still providing some protection in battle. But leatherwork wasn't limited to warfare. Look closer and you'll see artisans producing all kinds of daily items, sandals perfectly fitted for walking across sun-baked streets, intricately tooled belts, etched with geometric designs, and even containers for transporting water and oil. Flexible, lightweight vessels that could be carried long distances without the risk of shattering like pottery. One craftsman shows off a beautiful piece of decorated leather, dyed deep red using plant-based pigments. He rubs his hand over the smooth surface, proud of the vibrant color, one of the earliest forms of luxury fashion, you might say. You begin to see how leather bridged both the practical and the ceremonial. Temple offerings sometimes included finely worked leather goods. Trade caravans relied on tough leather straps to secure their loads. Wealthy families commissioned ornate leather sheaths for knives and tools or saddles for donkeys and oxen. And of course, there's the less glamorous but critically important role leather played in writing. Early scrolls and ledgers long before paper sometimes used treated hides as durable writing surfaces alongside clay tablets. Some of these parchments may have carried the first drafts of myths, tax records, or love poems we'll never read. You pause breathing in the blend of oils, hides, and dyes swirling through the workshop. These artisans aren't simply making things, they're solving real problems with whatever materials they can command. They can't run to a department store or order replacement parts online. Every strap vessel or harness they create has to work last and adapt to the punishing demands of daily life in this ancient world. As you turn to leave, you notice another leather worker carefully stitching soft slippers for a child. While next to him, his neighbor cuts and shapes a thick hide into armor for a soldier heading to the front lines. In this same moment, you see both tenderness and war preparation. Two sides of Mesopotamian life stitched together by these versatile craftsmen. But as much as leather transformed daily survival, another craft across the market may have had an even greater impact on Mesopotamian civilization: weaving. Ahead, you hear the rhythmic clack of looms, where skilled hands pull vibrant threads into beautiful patterns. You're about to enter the colorful world of textile artisans, where wool, flax, and patience wove the very fabric of Mesopotamian society. The leathery musk fades behind you, replaced now by the faint, almost musical clatter of wooden looms. You step into the textile quarter, a quieter, more rhythmic world. The looms click and thump like ancient metronomes, keeping time as skilled hands orchestrate a symphony of fibers. Here, artisans create something softer, but no less essential than metal or pottery fabric. The scent of freshly carded wool drifts on the warm breeze as spindles whirl and threads stretch like shimmering rivers across wooden frames. You pause beside one weaver, watching her fingers move with a hypnotic rhythm, pulling threads through vertical warps, then guiding a shuttle back and forth to build the cloth row by row. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia was the first place to develop true weaving looms, but by 3000 BCE, they had certainly mastered the technology. Simple, upright looms dominate this courtyard, their weighted threads swaying slightly as artisans adjust tension and spacing with precise skill. You watch a young spinner twist raw fibers into long, even threads. It starts with wool from sheep raised along the riverbanks, thick, oily fleeces full of lanolin that help soften and preserve the finished textiles. The spinner's spindle spins like a tiny top, pulling and twisting the fiber into fine strands that will become everything from tunics to temple offerings. Flax lies in bundles nearby, waiting to be stripped and softened for linen production. Linen requires even more patience, soaking, drying, beating, and combing the stiff fibers into smooth threads. But once woven, It creates a fabric cooler and lighter than wool, perfect for hot Mesopotamian summers. You run your fingers across several finished bolts of fabric stacked neatly in wooden bins. Some are simple utilitarian cloths for everyday wear. Others shimmer with intricate patterns and colors that practically hum with life. Striped robes, diamond-shaped motifs, and elaborate fringes, all produced by nothing more than practiced fingers, simple tools, and endless hours of labor. Historians still argue whether these patterns carried hidden meanings, status symbols, family markers, or perhaps even spiritual significance. Some scholars believe particular designs denoted temple affiliations or noble households, turning clothing into a wearable social language. And make no mistake, clothing mattered. The wealthy draped themselves in elaborately dyed and embroidered garments. Priests wore sacred textiles in their temple rituals. Even royalty displayed their power through massive, colorful garments imported or commissioned from the finest weavers. One loom nearby displays a partially finished robe destined for a palace, its edges embroidered with faint metallic threads. The effect is stunning, like sunlight captured in cloth. You notice teams of assistants working in tandem. One feeding threads, another adjusting weights, a third smoothing out imperfections. Weaving wasn't always a solitary craft. It often required collaboration, especially for larger or more complex commissions. And let's not forget the economic backbone behind all this fabric. Textiles were not just worn, they were currency. Woven cloth served as a form of trade payment for labor temple tribute and long-distance exchange. In many cases, you'd be paid in fabric before you ever saw a single silver shekel. You catch sight of several merchants inspecting newly finished bolts, fingering the weave, checking the dyes, and nodding in approval or shaking their heads and negotiating furiously. The commercial value of good fabric couldn't be overstated. In a world where money was still evolving, textiles were stable, portable wealth. One curious stall draws your attention: a pile of unusually bright garments dyed in vibrant reds, blues, and purples. The secret here lies not just in weaving, but in chemistry. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian dyers discovered their full color palette independently, or borrowed techniques from Egypt, Persia, and beyond. But their ability to extract brilliant dyes from plants, minerals, and even insects added immeasurable richness to their textiles. Nearby, you see vats filled with indigo madder root saffron and crushed insects, the building blocks of color. The dyers stir their cauldrons like potion makers, carefully controlling temperature ratios and timing to lock color into the fibers. Some colors were common. Others, like deep purple extracted from certain mollusks, were reserved for priests and royalty alone. You lean over one dye vat, catching the faintly sweet, sharp aroma of fermenting indigo. The transformation happening inside that murky liquid feels almost magical, from bland, pale threads into brilliant royal blue, vibrant, even under the muted Mesopotamian sun. Clothing wasn't merely practical here, it was cultural identity, social status, religious devotion, and economic power woven into every thread. As you step away, the rhythmic clacking of looms fades behind you. But just when you think you've seen the full spectrum of Mesopotamian invention, another workshop nearby offers a very different kind of alchemy. A world where color chemistry and even waterproofing collide. You're about to enter the sticky, strange domain of bitumen, a substance that Mesopotamian artisans used for everything from construction to medicine, from waterproofing to ritual burial. It's time to meet one of the weirdest materials in the ancient world. The rhythmic clatter of the looms fades as you step into an entirely different kind of workshop. The air grows heavier, stickier. Your sandals squelch slightly on the soft ground. Ahead, black, glossy pools bubble lazily under the sun, releasing occasional burps of sulfurous gas. Congratulations, you've arrived at the bitumen yard. At first glance, this place feels like something out of a low-budget sci-fi movie. Pools of dark terry liquid glisten under the Mesopotamian sky like spilled ink refusing to dry. Workers wearing stained garments shuffle carefully around the pits, stirring, scooping, and heating the viscous material over small fires. Bitumen, essentially naturally occurring asphalt, was one of Mesopotamia's most versatile and bizarre materials. Unlike Egypt, which had abundant stone, or the forests of Europe, which had endless timber, Mesopotamia's flat floodplains offered limited building resources. But what it lacked in rock, it made up for with this sticky black gift bubbling from the ground. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians were the first to fully exploit bitumen, but by 3000 BCE, they had definitely turned it into a technological Swiss Army knife. You watch as workers ladle hot bitumen into clay jars. Once cooled, these would be sealed and stored for use in countless industries. Nearby, a group applies warm bitumen to the hull of a reed boat. You watch as they smear the gooey substance along the seams, waterproofing the delicate reeds and transforming the fragile vessel into a cargo-worthy boat capable of floating grain dates and pottery down the mighty Euphrates. You move closer to a different workstation where builders coat sun-dried mud bricks with thin layers of bitumen, protecting entire buildings from rain floodwaters and erosion. In a land where rainfall was rare but floods were catastrophic, waterproofing was not a luxury, it was survival, and that's just the start. Bitumen also served as mortar for setting bricks, adhesive for crafting jewelry and mosaics, and even embalming material in certain burial practices. You glance over to see a craftsman pressing tiny inlaid shells and colored stones into a wooden panel using warm bitumen as the ancient equivalent of superglue. Historians still argue how much of bitumen's chemical properties Mesopotamians understood consciously versus discovering through centuries of careful observation. Whatever the case, they treated this sticky substance with both respect and practicality. Too hot and it became brittle. Too cool and it turned into an unworkable lump. Temperature control was key. You spot another station where workers filter impurities from the raw bitumen, patiently scooping out pebbles, plant debris, and insects. The cleaner the batch, the stronger and longer lasting the product. Some workshops even mixed bitumen with sand or chopped fibers for specific construction or artistic applications. Of course, bitumen had its darker side too. Soldiers sometimes used flaming bitumen as an early form of chemical warfare, hurling burning pots of the stuff at enemy walls or encampments. You wouldn't want to be anywhere near one of those firebombs, trust me. And if you thought modern medicine had its weird moments, early Mesopotamian healers used bitumen for treating wounds, setting broken bones, and even as a dental adhesive. Yes, somewhere back there, a brave patient likely walked around with a tar-filled tooth. Dental hygiene wasn't exactly a priority. You crouch beside one bubbling pool, mesmerized by how this ooze pulled straight from the earth could build homes, waterproof boats, seal pottery-bind jewelry, and star in both religious ceremonies and military sieges. It was equal parts tool, resource, and mystery, a liquid that shaped cities. As you stand wiping the tacky heat from your face, you realize how resourceful Mesopotamian artisans truly were. They didn't have the luxury of abundant metal ores, marble quarries, or giant cedar forests. They had rivers, reeds, clay, and bitumen. And they transformed those few raw materials into one of the world's first great civilizations. But not all of Mesopotamia's inventions involved brute materials like clay or tar. Some of their most revolutionary creations were small, precise, and shockingly advanced tools that allowed them to measure, calculate, and build with a level of precision that still impresses modern scholars. Ahead, you spot a different kind of workshop, one that's quieter, filled with rulers, plumb bobs, and curious measuring rods. You're about to enter the world of Mesopotamian mathematical tools, where numbers, geometry, and early engineering laid the blueprint for empires. The sticky heat of the bitumen yard fades as you cross into a much calmer space. Here, there's no pounding of hammers or bubbling of tar, only the soft scrape of styluses, the quiet shifting of measuring rods, and the gentle clatter of stone weights being placed onto balancing scales. You've entered the world of Mesopotamian measurement, where math meets craft and where precision was quietly invented, one careful calculation at a time. You stop beside a craftsman hunched over a clay tablet. His stylus moves with confident precision, pressing tiny wedge-shaped cuneiform marks into the soft clay. These aren't words or stories, they're numbers. Rows of calculations march neatly across the tablet, like tiny armies of symbols. This is not art. This is business. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian math arose from religious needs or simply from the demands of trade and construction. But one thing's certain, they developed some of the earliest, most sophisticated numerical systems humanity had ever seen. You glance closer and recognize something familiar, the sexagesimal system. Yep, that's right. The Mesopotamians used a base 60 counting system, which still echoes today every time you check a clock or measure a circle. You watch as another worker unfurls a length of cord, knotted at specific intervals, an early measuring line. This simple tool helped mark out plots of land, calculate building dimensions, and ensure irrigation canals ran at proper gradients. A single misstep in measurement could mean a collapsed wall or a flooded field. So accuracy wasn't just helpful, it was survival. Nearby you spot wooden plumb bobs, dangling from strings, helping builders ensure vertical alignment for walls, towers, and canals. The tool itself couldn't be simpler, a shaped weight tied to a string, but its impact was enormous. Even today, we still use versions of it in modern construction. You step toward a merchant carefully balancing a two-pan scale. On one side, he places polished stone weights, small standardized lumps carefully shaped to known masses. On the other, a bag of barley destined for trade. The scales tip back and forth before settling into perfect balance, finalizing a transaction that depends entirely on the accuracy of these humble weights. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian weights and measures were standardized across city-states or varied from region to region. Evidence suggests both local and temple-based standards existed, often overseen by scribes who acted as both accountants and regulators. And those scribes, oh, they were busy. You glance around at rows of clay tablets, each documenting property boundaries, loan agreements, and crop yields. These weren't just records. They were legal documents enforced by temple officials and city magistrates. Land disputes, they were settled with measurements recorded on tablets, many of which still survive in modern museums. Further along, a group of surveyors worked together to map out a new foundation site. Using cord stakes and simple right-angle tools, they carefully lay out perfectly rectangular building plots. You catch the faint echo of what would later evolve into geometry, a field of study the Greeks would refine, but which began right here in the muddy plains of Mesopotamia. You reach down and run your fingers across a thick measuring rod resting nearby. Etched with notches, it serves as a portable yardstick, an ancient precursor to the tape measure. Builders, merchants, and even tax collectors carried these rods as symbols of authority and fairness, tools that quite literally measured the world around them. Beyond trade and architecture, these early mathematical tools also shaped more abstract fields. Astronomers charted celestial movements using complex calculations that would eventually inform both astrology and early calendars. Temple priests tracked lunar cycles to plan religious festivals and agricultural seasons with remarkable precision. Historians still argue how much of this mathematical knowledge was passed upward into higher learning versus staying within the practical realm of daily work. But either way, these early artisans wielded numbers like tools quietly but powerfully, building the infrastructure of civilization. The sun dips lower as you stand there, realizing how much of Mesopotamian society depended not just on strength or resources, but on brains, careful calculation, disciplined observation, and the simple brilliance of tools so perfect they barely needed to change for thousands of years. But measurements and math weren't the only places where Mesopotamian ingenuity quietly flourished. Just beyond this workshop lies another, where artisans focused on something more: personal security. You're about to step into the surprisingly advanced world of ancient locks, keys, and security devices, where wooden pin tumbler locks protected goods grain and even temple treasures long before modern locksmiths ever existed. The numbers fade behind you as you drift into yet another hidden corner of Mesopotamian invention, a space where practicality meets paranoia. Welcome to the world of ancient security. You might think sophisticated locks are a relatively modern luxury, but here deep in the muddy streets of Ur or Lagash, locksmiths have already solved some of the most fundamental challenges of keeping things safe. You approach a small workshop where wooden beams are stacked neatly beside piles of bronze nails, hinges, and most curiously carefully carved wooden cylinders. The locksmith sits cross-legged, focused, whittling small pegs with steady hands. His tools are basic knives, drills, chisels. But what he's building is surprisingly complex, a wooden pin tumbler lock. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamians were the first to invent true mechanical locks. But evidence suggests that around 2000 BCE, they were definitely using wooden locks that employed an early pin and bolt mechanism, a system so effective that its basic principle remains in use today. You lean closer to study the mechanism. A hollow wooden bolt slides into a door socket. Inside the bolt, vertical holes are drilled and filled with wooden pins of varying lengths. When locked, these pins drop into corresponding holes in the socket, preventing the bolt from moving. But insert the correct key, a large wooden device with matching pegs, and those internal pins are pushed up to the exact height needed, freeing the bolt and unlocking the door. The key itself looks almost comical to your modern eyes, large, crude, a little like a wooden toothbrush, but its logic is stunning. You can't help but smile at how these ancient inventors essentially cracked the entire concept of modern locks long before steel tumblers or laser-cut keys ever existed. You glance around and notice these locks being fitted onto storage rooms, merchant warehouses, and even temple doors. Security wasn't just for private homes, it was a vital part of protecting food reserves, trade goods, and sacred objects that served both economic and religious power structures. One merchant watches closely as his new warehouse lock is installed. You can almost sense the quiet satisfaction on his face. Grain, fabrics, tools, all safe now behind this early marvel of engineering. Well, mostly safe, assuming nobody steals the key. Historians still argue how widespread these locks truly were. Were they standard for every home, or mostly reserved for temples, palaces, and wealthy merchants? Most surviving examples come from high-status sites. But the underlying technology was simple enough that it may have seen broader use than we can currently prove. Further along, you spot another security tool, clay seal impressions, known as bully. Merchants and scribes would press cylinder seals, those tiny carved stone rollers, into wet clay blobs to seal storage jars, documents, and shipping containers. The intact seal guaranteed that no one tampered with the contents without leaving clear evidence behind. You watch a scribe carefully roll his personalized cylinder across a clay lump, sealing a delivery of textiles. The intricate design, a mix of geometric patterns and tiny cuneiform symbols, identifies both the owner and the contents. It's a signature, a brand, and a security feature all in one. Break the seal and you expose the tampering. In some ways, you're witnessing the birth of contracts, barcodes, and security tape all at once. And like so many Mesopotamian inventions, the elegance lies in its simplicity. You step past another door, noticing yet another layer of security. Thick bronze hinges, heavy bolts, and reinforcing bars made of hardwood. Mesopotamian doors weren't flimsy. Whether protecting storage rooms or palace vaults, these doors were designed to last, backed by the same calculating minds that built temples and irrigation canals. Even the temples employed elaborate layers of security. Sacred objects, votive statues, ritual vessels, and precious offerings were locked away and sealed under priestly authority. Access wasn't just restricted by walls, but by law, religion, and technology working together. And for those with something truly valuable to hide, subterranean vaults offered a final defense. You hear whispered rumors among the workers about hidden chambers beneath temples where royal treasures and offerings to the gods were tucked away behind doors locked by systems few could operate. Historians still argue how much of this security was truly effective versus ceremonial, but the level of technological sophistication here is undeniable. These aren't crude solutions. They're early glimpses into the deeply human desire to protect what matters, to control access, guard wealth, and create boundaries, even in a world made of mud, brick, and reed. As you step away from the locksmith's stall, you feel that same pulse of innovation that runs through every Mesopotamian craft you've seen so far. Whether it's pottery, metal fabric, or locks, these people weren't just surviving. They were thinking, inventing, adapting. But nowhere does that inventive spirit shine quite so brightly as it does in their jewelry workshops. Up ahead, a soft gleam draws your eye toward the next marvel, delicate pieces of lapis carnelian and finely wrought gold. You're about to enter the glittering, microscopic world of Mesopotamian jewelry making, where artisans combined beauty, precision, and international trade into wearable works of art. The gleam pulls you forward like a moth toward the flame. You step into the jewelry district now, a quieter, more intimate world, but no less demanding of skill. Here, it's not brute strength or roaring kilns that rule, but delicacy, patience, and eyes trained to see the smallest flaw. Welcome to Mesopotamian jewelry making, where millimeter-sized mistakes separate the ordinary from the breathtaking. You pause beside a low wooden bench where an artisan sits cross-legged, his tools spread before him like surgical instruments. Fine bronze tweezers, tiny chisels, wire coils, and polishing stones glisten in the sun. A shallow clay dish nearby holds an assortment of beads, vibrant blues of lapis lazuli, deep reds of carnelian, pale translucence of agate, and flecks of gold that catch every shaft of light. You lean in to watch as he threads impossibly small lapis beads onto a length of fine gold wire. His fingers move like dancers, flipping each bead into place, with the kind of precision that feels more like meditation than labor. It's astonishing to think this could easily pass for high-end boutique craftsmanship today, except it's happening roughly 4,000 years before your local jewelry store ever existed. Historians still argue just how advanced Mesopotamian metalworking really was. Some believe these artisans possessed surprisingly sophisticated knowledge of alloy chemistry and gem sourcing. Others suggest much of the knowledge was deeply empirical trial and error perfected over generations of highly specialized craftsmen. One thing is certain, Mesopotamian jewelers were connected to a vast trade network. Lapis lazuli came all the way from what is now Afghanistan. Carnelian traveled from the Indus Valley. Even small amounts of gold and silver filtered in through complex trade routes that crisscrossed Asia and the Middle East. The jewelry you're watching take shape is not just a product, it's a storybook of global commerce written in gemstones. You move slowly through the narrow workshop lanes, your eyes catching flashes of gold leaf being hammered wafer thin. Artisans roll these delicate sheets over copper or bronze forms to create the illusion of solid gold objects at a fraction of the cost. You smirk to yourself. Mesopotamian artisans invented gold plating thousands of years before modern electroplating labs ever existed. Nearby, another jeweler engraves a tiny cylinder seal, a personal signature that will serve not just as decoration, but also as a legal tool. These seals, when rolled over wet clay, leave behind intricate patterns of animals, gods, and cuneiform inscriptions. The level of detail is absurdly fine, often requiring magnification to fully appreciate. You wouldn't dare sneeze while carving one. Historians still argue whether these cylinder seals were purely administrative or also carried spiritual significance. Many show scenes of deities bestowing power or protection, blending bureaucracy with belief in the most wearable way possible. Further along, you see artisans fashioning earrings, hairpins, amulets, and diadems, all destined for the temples, the palaces, or the wealthiest merchants. These aren't mass-produced trinkets. Each piece is unique, often custom-commissioned to reflect social status or divine favor. And jewelry wasn't purely aesthetic. Many pieces held protective or symbolic power. Amulets were inscribed with prayers or carved into the shapes of sacred animals. Some were even buried with their owners as part of elaborate funerary practices, ensuring status and spiritual protection in the afterlife. You pause by one small display, where finished works rest beneath woven cloths, a necklace of alternating lapis and gold beads, a pair of crescent-shaped earrings, and a delicate bracelet, whose clasp features a lioness frozen mid-roar. You can almost hear the whispered transactions that will soon take place when these treasures leave the workshop and enter the marketplace. The air here is quieter than the noisy foundries or clattering looms. Conversations are hushed, movements precise. Every mistake means wasted materials, costly materials that traveled thousands of miles to reach this bench. Each successful piece is both an artistic achievement and an economic triumph. Even the tools speak of advanced understanding. You notice fine drills spun by bowstrings, small anvils for shaping wire, and polishing stones that bring out the shine in every metal surface. These aren't crude approximations, they're specialized instruments refined over generations. As you stand amidst the shimmer, you realize that jewelry wasn't a side business here. It was a cornerstone of Mesopotamian identity. Wealth, power, religion, and trade all intersected in these glittering works. Even after thousands of years, many pieces survive intact in museum displays around the world, silent testaments to this extraordinary craftsmanship. And yet, as intricate and beautiful as these creations are, another kind of invention looms just beyond this workshop. One that isn't about personal adornment, but about reshaping the very land itself. Ahead lies the heart of Mesopotamian civilization, the massive irrigation networks, canals, and water management systems that allowed life to flourish between two unpredictable rivers. You're about to witness the quiet brilliance of Mesopotamian water engineering and the invention that quite literally made civilization possible. You leave the glittering jewelry workshops behind, stepping once more into open air. But now the ground beneath your feet tells an entirely different story. A soft crunch gives way to the sound of gently flowing water. Narrow channels snake across the landscape like a vast network of artificial veins, carrying liquid life through the heart of Mesopotamia. This isn't just clever plumbing. This is engineering on a scale that turns barren desert into paradise. You've arrived at the true secret behind Mesopotamia's survival irrigation. The twin rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, giveth, and they taketh away. Floodwaters could bring rich silt for farming, or drown entire settlements without warning. To survive, Mesopotamians had to master the rivers, bending them to human will through one of history's first large-scale water management systems. You pause at the edge of a canal as muddy water flows past, controlled not by chance, but by careful design. Earthen levees rise on either side, their surfaces hardened with layers of reeds clay, and sometimes you recognize it, even thin coatings of bitumen for waterproofing. Historians still argue whether these systems emerged organically from generations of trial and error, or were the result of centralized temple planning. Some say local farmers dug simple ditches first. Others believe temple bureaucrats organized massive labor forces to coordinate regional canal systems. Either way, what you see before you is astonishing. Water gates built from wood and stone allow farmers to regulate flow into smaller channels called shadufs, long poles with weighted buckets that swing gracefully to lift water from canals into adjacent fields. You watch a farmer rhythmically dipping and swinging, his motion as practiced and smooth as any artisan's. You glance at nearby fields where rows of wheat, barley, flax, and date palms stretch into the distance. Without these irrigation systems, none of it could exist. Rainfall was unreliable. The rivers were moody. But thanks to engineering, Mesopotamia blossomed into what many call the cradle of civilization. The math you saw earlier comes alive here. Surveyors laid out fields with astonishing precision, balancing water distribution across multiple plots. Land disputes often revolved around irrigation access, leading to some of humanity's first written legal codes regulating water rights. You pass a large stone basin, one of many settling pools where sediment was allowed to drop before water entered delicate channels. Even maintenance was carefully considered. Crews regularly dredged canals, reinforced levees, and repaired water gates to prevent collapse. Historians still argue how much political power flowed directly from irrigation control. Many believe that temples and kings weren't just religious or military leaders, they were water managers, their authority rooted in their ability to organize labor and guarantee food security. No water meant no crops. No crops meant no taxes. No taxes meant no power. Further ahead, you spot a larger engineering marvel, a broad diversion canal, splitting the river's flow toward distant villages. Workers coordinate with shouts and hand signals, raising and lowering wooden sluices to redirect the water like living architects of liquid. It's humbling to realize that some of these same irrigation routes remained in use for thousands of years, modified, but not fundamentally replaced until the modern era. You're walking along ancient infrastructure that outlasted empires. But irrigation wasn't only about farming. Water systems also supplied drinking water, fed public baths, filled sacred temple pools, and even flushed early sewer drains through narrow, mud-brick channels. The entire urban rhythm of Mesopotamian cities pulsed to the beat of these waterways. You pause at a small shrine beside the canal, where offerings sit beneath a stone stele honoring Enki, the god of water and wisdom. Spiritual reverence mingled with practical engineering here. Water wasn't just a resource, it was divine. As you watch the setting sun reflect off the rippling surface, you understand how these canals carried more than water. They carried stability, prosperity, and the very possibility of civilization itself. Without irrigation, there would be no fields, no cities, no artisans, no kings, only dust and nomads. And yet the mastery of nature didn't stop at farming. Just beyond these fields as night falls, you hear faint echoes of another craft music. The hum of strings, the soft tap of drums, and the whisper of flutes drift across the landscape. You're about to step into the final chapter of Mesopotamian artistry, one where sound itself became invention. Prepare to enter the world of Mesopotamian musical instruments, where rhythm, ritual, and melody filled the temples, courts, and taverns of the ancient world. The sky darkens into a deep velvet as you follow the soft current of sound, weaving its way through the twilight. You've left behind the clatter of looms, the hiss of kilns, and the babble of canals. Now you step into something altogether different, the realm of Mesopotamian music, where invisible vibrations became just as vital to the soul as food and water were to the body. You find yourself at the edge of a small courtyard lit by oil lamps. Musicians sit in a loose circle, their instruments resting in calloused hands, their focus complete. A woman plucks at a lyre, its strings humming beneath her fingers, with a warmth that cuts through the night air. The notes rise and fall, like a second language, one that doesn't need cuneiform to be understood. The lyre, arguably the king of Mesopotamian instruments, captures your attention first. Its wooden frame curves like a crescent moon, often adorned with elaborate carvings of bulls, lions, or mythological creatures. The strings, likely made from gut or twisted sinew, gleam faintly in the lamplight. This isn't a crude noisemaker. It's an instrument of skill, ceremony, and status. Historians still argue whether these early lyres evolved independently or borrowed elements from even earlier stringed instruments in nearby regions. But by 2500 BCE, Mesopotamians had fully embraced their own musical identity. Excavations at the Royal Cemetery of Ur have unearthed some of these very lyres, perfectly preserved wooden frames inlaid with lapis gold and mother-of-pearl, silent but still magnificent. Nearby, another musician softly taps a small drum, a frame drum taut animal skin stretched across a circular wooden frame. The steady beat pulses beneath the melody, anchoring it, guiding it. Drums were the heartbeat of both ritual and daily life, used in everything from temple processions to tavern entertainment. Off to one side, a player raises a long, slender flute to her lips. The hollow reed sings with a clear bird-like tone, carrying its melody high into the darkening sky. Early flutes were often crafted from reeds or hollowed bones, simple in design, but hauntingly effective. And then there's the sistrum, a kind of ancient rattle often made of metal that rings like tiny bells when shaken. These rattles weren't just for music. They had ceremonial purposes believed to ward off evil and call attention to rituals and divine offerings. Historians still argue how much of Mesopotamian music was formalized versus improvised. While fragments of notation have been discovered, tiny clay tablets with strange markings that may represent early scales or tuning systems, most of the actual melodies have been lost to time. What remains are the instruments themselves, and countless carved reliefs and statues showing musicians performing for God's kings and feasting guests. You notice how the musicians seem deeply tied to their instruments, not merely playing them, but communing with them. Music here wasn't background noise. It was ritual diplomacy and even medicine. Temple priests used chants and stringed hymns to honor the gods. Royal banquets pulsed with music to entertain foreign dignitaries. Healing rituals incorporated songs believed to soothe the spirit and body alike. One performer pauses to adjust the tension on her lyre strings, briefly plucking a strange interval that sends a brief shiver through your spine. Mesopotamian scales weren't based on the familiar do-re-mi of modern Western music. They employed a variety of tunings, often pentatonic or heptatonic, that gave their music a distinct, almost otherworldly flavor. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian music influenced later traditions in Egypt, Greece, and Persia. Some scholars trace certain instruments and scales directly through these regions, suggesting a musical lineage stretching across thousands of years. You glance upward at the clear night sky, those same stars guided these ancient musicians as they performed beneath temple ziggurats, confident that their songs reached the heavens. After all, music was not simply for human enjoyment. It was a bridge to the divine. As the ensemble continues, a small audience gathers traders, priests, children, and tired workers, all swaying gently, eyes half closed, lost in the melody. For a brief moment, you feel fully embedded in their world, as though time itself has folded. And yet, as rich as this world feels, you know its echoes have largely faded. Most of these instruments, scales, and traditions were eventually lost or absorbed into other rising cultures. The music that once filled these courtyards now survives only in fragments, broken pieces of bone flutes, decorative lyre panels, and scattered texts hinting at lost songs. But the silence won't last much longer. Up ahead, as your journey nears its final turn, you approach the place where all of these brilliant inventions collided with tragedy, the forces that caused so many of these Mesopotamian crafts to vanish. Prepare yourself for the final chapter, a reflection on why so many of these innovations were lost, buried beneath sand conquest, and the relentless march of time. You leave the soothing hum of the music behind, stepping into the deep silence of history itself. The stars glitter overhead, but now the air feels heavier, as if the weight of lost centuries presses down with every step you take. You've arrived at the final threshold where invention gives way to disappearance, and brilliance is buried beneath layers of dust and conquest. The question hangs in the air like an unsung note. How could so much be lost? You pause beside crumbling mud brick walls, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and time. Once these walls rang with life potters, spinning clay glassmakers, pulling molten threads, smiths pouring liquid bronze weavers, clacking their looms, and jewelers threading lapis onto golden wires. Now there's only ruin. Historians still argue whether it was one great collapse or 1,000 small ones that swept these inventions into obscurity. In truth, Mesopotamia was not conquered once it was conquered repeatedly. Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Parthians. Each new empire layered itself atop the last, like geological strata of human ambition. Each wave brought both preservation and destruction. Temples were sacked, libraries burned, workshops abandoned. Skilled artisans were often enslaved, relocated, or simply wiped out. Knowledge passed down by word of mouth vanished when masters and apprentices were separated. Without constant practice, fragile techniques like lost wax casting or lapis carving faded quickly. You stepped carefully around a collapsed doorway. The remains of a pottery kiln peek from the dirt, the fire long since extinguished. The brilliance of Mesopotamian kiln design, carefully controlled heat, multi-chambered layouts, slowly disappeared, as invading powers either failed to adopt the methods or replace them with their own. Floods played their part too. The very rivers that sustained Mesopotamia also betrayed it. Shifting courses drowned entire cities. Canals silted up. Without careful maintenance, irrigation systems collapsed, turning farmland into marsh or desert. The land could not support its own weight when the human systems that tamed it faltered. Even language contributed to the forgetting, as Aramaic Greek and eventually Arabic replaced Sumerian and Akkadian. The cuneiform script that had recorded so many inventions grew silent. Without scribes to read the tablets, much of Mesopotamian knowledge simply became undecipherable. You kneel beside a half-buried clay tablet, its wedge-shaped script still crisp beneath the dust. For centuries, these tablets sat in the earth, unread, their knowledge locked away, until modern archaeologists painstakingly learned to hear their voices again. Historians still argue whether some of these lost inventions might have re-emerged independently elsewhere. Certainly, pottery wheels, metal casting, and irrigation spread far and wide, though often altered or reinvented by new cultures unaware of their Mesopotamian origins. You move forward, passing the base of a once towering ziggurat. Only a low platform remains, its baked bricks cracked but defiant. This was once a center of not only religion, but scientific inquiry, where astronomy, medicine, and mathematics intertwined. Now even the gods themselves seem to have moved on, and yet you realize not everything was lost completely. Some technologies, like the wheel writing and measurement systems, survived because they proved too useful to disappear entirely. The base 60 system still echoes every time we count 60 seconds or divide a circle into 360 degrees. Babylonian star charts laid groundwork that influenced Greek and later Islamic astronomers. In small ways, Mesopotamian artisans whisper to us still. You pause again, considering how fragile invention really is. It's easy to imagine history as a steady march forward, but the ruins around you prove otherwise. Human knowledge can evaporate far more quickly than it accumulates, especially when it relies on memory, apprenticeship, and fragile political stability. One burned city, one lost generation, one severed trade route. That's all it takes for brilliance to slip into legend. And yet look closer. In tiny villages, descendants of these same crafts survive. Farmers still lift water with shadoofs. Artisans in remote regions still use bitumen to waterproof boats. Modern jewelers rediscover lost wax casting without realizing its true age. The seeds of Mesopotamian genius were scattered wide, carried unknowingly by conquerors and refugees alike. Historians still argue whether we'll ever fully recover all that was lost. Some cuneiform tablets remain buried. Some inventions may never be recognized for what they were. But every archaeological dig brings new fragments into the light, a broken lyre here, a copper mold there, a forgotten tablet emerging from the sand. You stand in the cool night air, surrounded by these ghosts, not mournfully, but with quiet awe. For while time may have erased their names, the hands of these ancient artisans shaped far more than their own moment. They helped lay the foundation for every wheel spun, every pot fired, every piece of jewelry worn today. Up ahead, a final clearing awaits, a place not of invention, but of reflection. As your journey comes to an end, it's time to gently drift into the quiet wind down of this long-forgotten world. You step into the final clearing as the cool night air brushes softly against your skin. The ruins fade into shadows behind you, but their presence lingers, silent sentinels watching over a world that once pulsed with invention. Labor, and brilliance. You've walked among Mesopotamia's lost artisans, seen their tools, their fires, their delicate hands at work, and now you stand where their story settles into stillness. The stars overhead feel familiar, ancient companions to every craftsman, trader, priest, and farmer who once called these cities home. They gazed up at these same constellations as they wove their textiles, tuned their lyres, etched their seals, and chiseled their cylinder stamps into clay. The sky holds their memory like a quiet, eternal archive. You crouch beside a fragment of broken pottery half buried in the dust, a simple jar, perhaps, once filled with oil grain or wine. It's cracked now, its usefulness long spent, yet it remains as proof that these hands, those of potters, weavers, glassmakers, jewelers, once filled this world with beauty and practicality. Historians still argue how much of this knowledge was ever truly lost. Was it destroyed completely? Was it absorbed into other empires? Was it sleeping beneath the sand, waiting for curious modern hands to find it again? Likely it's all of those things at once, a complicated tangle of loss, survival, and rediscovery. You glance toward the horizon where distant ziggurats once reached toward the heavens. Here, invention was never purely mechanical. It was deeply spiritual. The artisans weren't merely makers. They were participants in the great cosmic balance, manipulating earth fire, metal, water, and wind into harmony. Every lock carved, every seal rolled, every bead strung was an act of collaboration with the gods. And yet, despite their brilliance, their world proved fragile. Climate shifts dried out fields. Political chaos unseated kings. Foreign armies tore through cities, scattering craftsmen, burning workshops, toppling temples. The rhythms of the potter's wheel and the weaver's loom were replaced by silence. But you know something they didn't. You know their work lives on not only in museum cases or archaeological journals, but in the echoes of your own world. Every lock you turn, every pot you use, every hour you divide into 60 parts, carries a faint fingerprint of Mesopotamian ingenuity. Even when forgotten, their creations endure in the very structure of how you move through your daily life. You close your eyes for a moment, listening not for music or for hammers or for spinning wheels, but for the soft hum of legacy. It's quieter now. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the gentle spin of the potter's wheel, of the low crackle of the bronze caster's furnace, the muted song of lyre strings plucked beneath temple walls. You open your eyes, breathing in the dry night air one last time. You've traveled far tonight, not just through a physical place, but through centuries of human creativity, risk, and resilience. And while so much was lost, the very act of remembering brings it alive once more. Their story isn't finished. Not really. And now you let your breath settle as your journey gently fades into stillness. The ruins grow quieter now as your body relaxes, settling deeper into comfort. The night air wraps softly around you like a woven shawl spun from the ancient looms you've seen tonight. The distant echoes of forges' looms and lyres fade into a gentle hush, like the final breath of a once bustling city falling asleep beneath the stars. You exhale slowly, feeling your heartbeat ease, your muscles soften. The heavy work of artisans long gone has left only this calm quiet, a space where time pauses and the burdens of invention drift away like faint candle smoke. Even now, beneath layers of earth and dust, those forgotten tools rest patiently untouched, but never truly gone. Their silence is not absence, it's rest. A long, peaceful slumber beneath the world they helped build. Let your thoughts soften with them, allowing the steady rhythm of your breath to carry you deeper into rest. The past holds no weight here, only calm, only stillness. Sleep well, traveler. The artisans of Mesopotamia are watching over you quietly, gently waiting beneath the stars.